good to have you with us. We heard a lot about when this new offensive was launched by the Ukrainian forces to try to regain territory around the city of Kherson and hopefully the city itself. But there's been very little news on the progress. What do you know about what's going on there?
Well, the first thing to say is that tactical battles are sequenced to support operational objectives to further strategic ends. So that is why the battle on the eastern side of the river Dnieper is being fought at the moment. And I really think there are three Ukrainian objectives to this. The first one is to regain control of the territory to the west of the Dnieper River by the winter. That's the first objective. The second one is to render the Crimea of no military value to Russian forces. And the third one is to prevent Russia consolidating any political gain for political control, so they can't have faux referenda and things like that. Now, you won't have heard much about the assault that is going on to the west of Kherson city itself, because the operational security of Ukraine is pretty good and pretty tight at the moment. And of course, they're really fighting three battles. The first one is the contact battle with the Russians. Those forces were opposing them on the front line. The second one is the deep battle, that is negating the logistic potential and the artillery and command posts of the Russians. That's the clever battle they've been fighting to degrade all those ammunition depots and things like that. And the third one is to preserve their combat potential by the rear battle. So I don't think you're going to see any spectacular breakthroughs. But I think if you go back about 6 weeks, there was a visit to Ukraine by Republican Senator Mike Waltz. At that time, he sort of said that Zelensky was fearful of losing slowly, and the aim had been then to play for a tie. I think they're beyond that now with the capabilities that have been given them by the international community. And now we're in the position when Ukraine are winning slowly. Now, it can be that winning slowly turns into winning quickly, because one of the things you never know about in war is the power of resistance. And that is really your total means multiplied by your will to win or resist. And that gives you your power resistance. What I do think will happen on the west side of the river is that the Russian forces there, with very limited means of supply across the river, will be kettled and crushed, or they will surrender en masse. Either way, if they flee, if they don't do that in good order, that is what we call a retrograde operation, and that will turn into a rout. And a rout or a withdrawal in disorder can have a really debilitating effect on a force.
Yeah, and we've been hearing reports from the Ukrainian side of heavy Russian losses in and around Kherson. You talked there about the tactics and how they could succeed, but it's also proven to be incredibly difficult to remove the Russian forces once they've got territory and have dug in there.
That's true, but then you've got to then ultimately work out what is war fought for. Now, war is fought for political objectives, and what's difficult to see at the moment is why fighting stops. Why fighting stops is really for three reasons: either because of the unacceptable cost to a nation, either morally, politically, military, economically, and those costs have been really great for Ukraine, which is why they need supporting, or they end because of decisive military victory, which you cannot see at the moment, or because of the improbability of victory. That is, you get to a position where you have a ceasefire, and then hopefully either an armistice or a peace settlement. Now, what is difficult at the moment is both sides have adopted maximalist positions. We saw that from the Russian side this week with a talk by Slutsky, who is a member of the Duma and was part of the Russian delegation for talks early in March, when he talked in the same way that Putin did in early March about total victory and unconditional surrender of the Ukrainian forces. Yeah. On the other side, you've got Zelensky, because of his democratic mandate and because the idea of trading land for peace is not on the agenda, with very high ratings in the high 80s for there shall be no trading of land for peace, saying that Ukraine will return all to its own and that they will drive the invaders to the border. They are both maximalist positions. Certainly the Ukrainians have to take that position at the moment.
Sorry, just so many aspects of this to talk about. What about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant? There have been huge concerns about the fighting around that. We know that inspectors have been able to get onto the site. How significant is that?
Well, I think one of the things that Biden said last July, so a long time before the war started, was that Russia is really a gas station with nuclear weapons masquerading as a country. Now, the masquerading as a country with the nuclear weapons is you can use the deterrence by fear, either in terms of the fear of using nuclear weapons or the fear of radiation. And of course, it is that fear of radiation from the Zaporizhzhia plant which worries people. Now, we do know that there are a number of safety pillars. All of them have been compromised to an extent, but not compromised to the extent where there is a massive radiological leaks. But if you were a military purist, you'd say that the area around that should be a no-fire area, and that for either international humanitarian law reasons or for policy reasons, they are no-go areas to international forces. And that is what the position the Russians should get to.
Although, of course, at the moment there's no one to impose a no-fire zone around that plant. We've been talking, though, about the wider war, the energy war that President Putin is also pursuing, the news of the indefinite closure of Nord Stream 2. And Nord Stream 1, I should say, you were talking about the importance of weapons and ammunition from the West in terms of the capabilities of Ukrainian forces. Do you think that President Putin is counting on the West losing its resolve to continue to support Ukraine in the way that it has been by cutting off these energy supplies and by making life so difficult for so many citizens right across Europe and beyond?
Yeah, it's a part of the hybrid warfare. It's the force of politics rather than the politics of force. However, we want to keep our nerve, because one of the things that came out in March in the Versailles Declaration from the EU was that contributing nations should top up their gas supplies to 80% by around now to make sure that there would be no negative or deficits for the winter. If you look at Germany at the moment, they're over 85%. So the gas will be there. The price of it is a different issue. Militarily, Ukraine is in the ascendancy, but you're right that I think Putin believes that the West will lose the political will to support Ukraine in the longer term. But there's lots of parts to the West. That will not be the position with those who feel an existential threat from Russia, the Baltic states, Poland, and America is different than the rest of the European West. It doesn't rely on any Russian gas supplies or any of that sort of thing. It will not have a cold winter.
And Boris Johnson has been one of the staunchest supporters of President Zelensky. Do you expect Liz Truss, if indeed she does succeed him early next week, to be as resolute in offering that support, providing the weapons, providing the training, and urging other world leaders to maintain their support for Ukraine?
I think so. I think there's been fairly bipartisan support for Ukraine in the UK, as there has been, apart from maverick elements in the US, for example. We've got to really, from my perspective, of course, I look at this from a geopolitical perspective, when the Russians are a revanchist threat, not only to Ukraine, but to the whole idea of a rules-based polity in Europe. If we don't wake up to that threat and that they've got a genocidal agenda for the future, then we've got a real problem. Liz Truss, of course, also said quite early on as Foreign Secretary in about April that she saw this war lasting 10 years. Now, none of us can actually forecast how long this war will last, but one of the myths, of course, is war will be short. And that is one of the myths that caught the Russians out when they thought this would be a thunder run to Kyiv and it would all be over in the first week.
Let me ask you about those comments from the chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood. He told Times Radio that he thought that we could see a tactical nuclear weapon used in the next 10 years. Do you think he's right about that?
Doctrinally, he's right. It is, again, one of the predominant intelligence agencies in America, the Director of National Intelligence, Lieutenant General Scotty Berrier, said in the House Armed Services Committee on the 19th of March that if Russia was losing, in order to compel the enemy to force it to compel it to its will, then doctrinally the use of tactical nuclear weapons, if it was exhausted or the war was likely to go on could be an option. But having a doctrinal view is different than enforcing or going beyond a nuclear taboo. And I think at the moment, I'd still put that as a low probability, a probability yardstick, which in intelligence terms is highly unlikely. And that doesn't mean it will change, but I think there are too many people in the Russian chain of command who would like to see a future which is not the one that Putin wants. There is a different question then, which is how do you protest or get rid of Putin and have a different regime which doesn't look like Putin's?